This is the second video in part 4 of our financial education series, and this is the final part of the series. And what we're focusing on this part is specific funding goals, right? And saving for them, identifying for them, saving for them, and if it makes sense, investing for them. In the first video, we talked about the timing of investing. And the reason we focused on that was just because I was getting a lot of questions about that. And so I was assuming that even those that weren't asking the question directly may have had the question. But what I want to talk about here is really identifying those specific savings goals. And I'm going to take you all the way back to part 1 of this course content. So in part 1 of this course content, we looked at this objectives and goals worksheet. And as part of that, we talked about how important it is to be smart with your savings goals. And when I say smart, what I mean is make the goal specific, make sure that it's measurable, that it's achievable, that it's relevant, and that you're assigning a time to it, so that it's time bound. And that's really important here. So as you think about the funding goals that are coming up for you in the near future, or in the not so near future, right? You think about things like buying a house, buying a car, anything that's going to be a major expense that you haven't saved for right now, but you want to start saving for it. It's really important to identify that goal. Really take it down to the details of, to the best of your knowledge today, what that looks like for you. So, if we're using the house as an example, right? So identifying on this sheet, right, that you want to save for a house, you know what the cost is. But even getting more specific, if you can actually visualize, where that house, where you want that house to be, or what the parameters of that house should be. So being as specific as possible, making sure that you're identifying how much it's going to cost, right? So at the best of your knowledge today, how much that costs. Asking yourself, is it reasonable? Is this something that I can actually do? Make sure that it's something that makes sense for you. And then finally, assign a timeline to that, right? So ideally, when do you want to do that? And make sure, and if ideally is different than what's actually achievable at this point, it's important to note that and be aware of that, and then assign, okay, when is it? When do I think, at least today, when do I think it's achievable? Okay, so that's number 1. Identify and be specific as possible with that savings goal. Number 2 is start thinking about the funding strategy. What can I commit to today to putting toward that specific savings goal, right? So after we've done all the things that were on that flow chart that we talked about in part 1 of this series, right? Saving to our 401k up to the company match, making sure that you have an emergency fund in place, all of those things that we've talked about. Now, what do I have left to start putting toward this savings goal? And making sure that it is the priority, right? That it's more important than other goals that you have. Okay, so that's getting to a point where you have a funding strategy. So how much am I going to save? Is it per month, per year, every other month, whatever it may be? Get that funding strategy together. And I'm including a little worksheet here that just at least gives you a place to start in identifying what that funding strategy looks like. So once you've done that, I think the next question to ask yourself is, am I comfortable with risk as it relates to funding that goal? And this gets into the investment part of it, right? So once you've identified the goal, once you've made it specific, you've made it smart, right? Ask yourself, am I comfortable taking on some risk in order to achieve that goal, right? Because anytime we move over to this investment discussion, we talked about this in part 3, talk about this decision to invest. Is the potential reward, is the potential that I can achieve it faster worth the risk that, the money may not be worth what it's worth today if my investments are down at that point, right? What you're willing to take on as it relates to risk is going to dictate whether or not you even invest those funds, or if you do choose to invest them, how you invest them, right? How much of that market volatility are you willing to take on? How much time do you have, right? What is the time horizon? Do I have enough time that I'm fairly confident, based on what markets have done historically, that it's going to be worthwhile for me to invest for this goal? So that's really what I want you to focus on here. So think about those savings goals, identify them, make them specific, make them smart, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. And then ask yourself what the funding strategy is. So how much can I contribute to that goal each month, each quarter, etc. And then ask yourself if you're comfortable with risk, right? And if you're comfortable with risk, then we can move on to the investment discussion. And that's when you can start to get into, should I invest this in a mutual fund, an index fund, whatever makes sense. And if you have more questions about that, as I've said before, you can just contact me directly.